Hey Sid, how are you?
Hi Chris, afternoon. I'm great actually. It's a bright and sunny Friday where I am, so that's always a good start to the day. But yeah,
Love that.
how's things with yourself?
Love that. Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. Been a pretty manic week, but so's every week at the moment. It's
Yeah,
pretty interesting time from a recruiting perspective. So yeah, that's a topic for another day. But thank you for jumping on with me. I appreciate you taking the time. First of all, we're obviously going to be going through sort of soft skills as the main thing, which is
hmm
obviously super important for any role within engineering. But I guess it gets more important as you climb the ladder and go into the leadership side of things, and we'll kind of dig through that a little bit more. But for anyone that doesn't know you, I know you said you hate this question, but for anyone that doesn't know you, just tell me a little bit about your background, kind of who you are, and kind of yeah, like your journey to get to where you are at the moment.
you're right. This is one of the questions that I don't like as much, usually because I've been around a while and seen a lot of things in my career. I don't come from your stereotypical software engineering background. I didn't kind of go to uni and do CS and become a developer and work my way up. I did many other things across different industries for 10 plus years before joining technology. Most of what I did was in leadership roles, which has kind of helped bring me to where I am today. It's helped me see leadership and management from different perspectives and then be able to apply that into an engineering team. But the last 10 years or so, I've been around technology and engineering, transition from a kind of hobbyist web developer to getting some more formal training um, in web development things, became a software engineer, onto tech lead, engineering manager, up to kind of fractional CTO where I'm at now. I've worked predominantly with small and medium sized startups up to kind of scale up size, been through a couple of M&As, and now been focusing my time the last year on further studies, been doing an MBA in tech leadership with the CTO Academy, and doing a lot of coaching and consulting work with individuals at senior leadership level and some of the companies that they represent to help them overcome some of the kind of challenges that you talk about in your podcast here.
Amazing. Well, I guess first thing, like fractional CTO, I feel like I've been recruiting for about 11 years now, and I feel like this kind of just popped up out of nowhere a few years ago, and now I see fractional absolutely
hmm
every single different type of role, from sort of like fractional HR, like particularly for smaller
Yep.
companies. I kind of get it. Fractional CTO, like what what does
It's
that kind of mean, and is it different for every organization, or have you got kind of like a bit of a one size fits all, like you get a few hours a week from me, I'll help you with certain things?
Honestly, it's one of those terms which has become a bit of a thing the last 12 or so months. But fundamentally, the kind of things that a fractional anything, let alone CTO, will do, hasn't changed and it has been around a while. As you kind of alluded to there, it could just mean someone who's part time. I've been in a company before where I was the head of engineering and we had a fractional CTO. That person was a CTO in every way you can imagine in terms of job description, what they did with us in the org, but they did it part time, so 3 days a week. There are the types of fractional CTOs where time isn't the limiting factor, but the scope of their involvement in the organization is. They may be specialized in a certain area, say cybersecurity. The organization may already have a really good CTO and engineering team, but they're missing some of that skills gap or knowledge gap and things. So they're bringing this expert to supplement it. But it can mean a lot of different things, and it is a bit of a buzzword at the moment. So try not to get caught up too much on that.
For sure. Interesting, like you said, that there's almost, it seems to be part-time CTO or fractional CTO. They seem to be like slightly different roles.
They can be. I mean, you know how titles are in any industry, let alone ours. Head of engineering, for example, if I pick something kind of mid-rank from management levels, it can mean so many things. I've been a head of engineering where there was no one more senior than me. I was the de facto CTO. And I've also been around organizations where the head of engineering was one of five, and then the head VPs and SVPs, and then the CTO. So dynamics change according to the business and its size and things. The title
Sure.
is not usually a good indicator of what the person does or can do.
Yeah, if you think it's bad within engineering, you should see it within recruitment. I'm sure you've seen VP of .NET Recruitment US for a certain company, and it's just that one person, no person reporting into them in a company of 6 people. But I
Yep,
think we're a sucker for title probably more than anyone else. There's probably the sales element, to be honest. But yeah,
absolutely.
like let's jump into it. So soft skills, like what huge obviously like topic, like huge thing within any sort of leadership role, but within sort of like engineering leadership, what do you kind of define under the sort of soft skills banner?
So the kind of problems that I've encountered in engineering orgs in particular, or technology companies, I should say, as a broader scope, that relate to soft skills. There's the big ones, again, broad topics on their own, communication and collaboration. But then things like critical thinking, um, and even a little bit of psychology. Um, so to elaborate on the psychology part, it's kind of about understanding the people around you, what makes them tick, what triggers them, what makes them happy, what can frustrate them, especially in this predominantly remote world that we're in now. It's understanding the people that you work with or communicate with on a regular basis, not only inside your org, but it may be external parties. There's obviously outside stakeholders may need to communicate with. Um, Understanding their cultures, their backgrounds, which country they're in, which time zone, and things like that, really help you do all of these other things like the communication and collaboration better. It's a good kind of baseline. That doesn't mean you need to start reading loads of Sigmund Freud's work, or get a degree in human psychology, but just understanding people before moving on to the other aspects of soft skills.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, I think the remote aspect has led to like two big things within sort of like understanding the people that kind of work for you. One is that you're not necessarily seeing people day to day, even on sort of like Teams meetings or whatever. Like
Hmm.
you don't see people every day. Whereas before, 5 days a week, you see people. You could see if they're not themselves.
Hmm.
You can kind of really get a read from people. I spoke to someone a little while ago, and he was so ingrained with his team remotely that he knew the like Slack emoji responses that were typical for like different team members, and like
Hmm.
someone would like thumbs up instead of like fire, and he'd be like, oh, something's off with them, and like have to go off
Yeah.
into like a separate thing. So like reading cues from people like virtually like
Hmm.
must be quite different. And then, like you said, the fact that everyone's not all based in the same location, same
Hmm.
backgrounds, like all of that kind of stuff, like having people in different time zone states, even countries, like it's different, even basic stuff like holidays, like
Hmm.
and things like that, that people are off different working hours. Like some countries shut down for all of
Yep.
August for like summer and things like that, and it'd be quite hard to like integrate those cultures a lot of the time. So really understanding the people that you've got, I think, is more important than ever when you can't see people face to face, and they're
Hmm.
more distributed than they've ever been.
Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely. That culture thing that you just touched on there is a big deal, and in a way that most people don't think about, because we hear a lot about culture fit and culture and that in these kind of organizations at the moment. But the angle that I saw it from some years ago now was a bit different, shall we say? Um, so to explain what happened, I was a relatively new engineering manager. I'd brought in two new hires just after my promotion. One of them was a very junior engineer, female, and you'll understand maybe the relevance of that in a moment. And the other person, very highly experienced, senior staff level engineer, male. Um, Now, these two people, I mean, without going into kind of DE and I topics in detail, men and women obviously have very different kind of underlying personality traits. Um, a lot of the time inherently. But in this case, it wasn't just um, them being different sexes, but it was a case of this girl. She was from a Mediterranean country, grown up there, still living there, working from there remotely, and had this cultural presence where she was very warm and bubbly and kind of very excitable. But her personal trait was she was also very sensitive. On the flip side, you had this person who was from an ex-Soviet state, a fair bit older than the girl, and had been around for a long time in the industry, and had built up this very stern way of talking and behaving. Um, they were both great at their jobs, never found a flaw with anything they did, but they had a communication breakdown because of cultural differences. When the gent would communicate with others, he was very matter of fact, to the point, and because he had quite a harsh accent and things as well, it came across like he was being a bit aggressive at times if you didn't know him. And she was the opposite. She was very timid and bubbly and things when she spoke. She was quite soft with it. Um, so if someone came into a conversation, especially if it was like a stand-up or some kind of group call where they were discussing some technical topics, he may come across as overpowering and overbearing, like he was trying to take charge. But that wasn't actually the case. And the people which worked closer with him knew that, but she didn't. She didn't understand the cultural differences about how he was used to speaking and working in previous environments in his home country. And it worked the other way around too. It was a bilateral thing. Within a space of an hour after these two interacting with no other people being around, they both came to me with complaints about each other. She was crying. He was confused. And all it took was to give them a bit of time to kind of calm down, assess the situation, and explain to them, look, we're an international team. We're not just distributed by miles, but cultures and backgrounds and everything. And they started looking into how people work in different areas and in areas as in countries and things. And then the three of us sat in a room together virtually and said, look, I know you guys don't dislike each other. The things that you're saying are actually complementary of each other, but you've just had some kind of communication breakdown. You think that he was being aggressive, and he thought that she was being too soft and not asserting certain things. Actually, there's not a problem here. It's just communications. And it was only when we dug into that we realized, hold up a minute, we should probably deal with this sooner rather than later for the wider team, because we're in a kind of scaling phase where we're bringing a lot of new people in. And within 6 months, we added 20 people from 18 different countries. So they could have potentially all had these friction points if we didn't address it. So we introduced some training for the whole organization on how people are used to working and communicating in different areas. And it really helped. It helped people understand each other and work together better.
I love that. Do you find yourself like with those two, for example? Do you find yourself adapting your communication styles like for them, or do they have to get used to the way that you work as a manager as well?
It's interesting. It's actually a topic which came up in a workshop the other day at a CTO Academy. Um, so I think there's a bit of give and take. I think we all need to go into new relationships of any time with a bit of give and take, right? But generally speaking, the way I explained it in the workshop the other day was, imagine going on holiday to a foreign country where you don't know the language at all. Even if you're in a tourist area where they may know a bit of English or something, generally speaking, it's quite common for people to have communication breakdowns when ordering your food or out and about, right? You wouldn't expect everybody in that restaurant to suddenly learn English. It may be beneficial for them because it's a tourist location to find some kind of widely spoken language depending on where they are. But generally speaking, as the tourist going there, you should be more prepared to change your communication style to understand them better. And certain things like body language with that whole tourist situation again. I'm sure we've all seen sketches on TV and things of people like they try and over communicate by waving their hands around and pointing and gesturing at what they're trying to explain to people. We inadvertently do this in conversations with people that we work with as well, whether it's virtually or in a room present with people. We suddenly sit upright to attention or put our hands on the table or start gesturing wildly with our hands. Like these are all communication things that we should be mindful of, and we should adapt the way we speak and listen to the different people around us, especially if they're new to us and we don't really know them well.
Sure. And the classic example of people being on holiday and just saying everything but louder again
Yeah.
doesn't really translate to good communication styles internally either. So I guess overall, like we were chatting before, and you've kind of broken this down into two main topics. You've gone for seeing the bigger picture and kind
Mm-hmm.
of communication and collaboration. So let's jump into the first one. When you talk about seeing the bigger picture, like what do you kind of mean there?
Well, seeing the bigger picture topic that we kind of touched on prior to the call was not so much in terms of soft skills, but more about strategy and critical thinking. Um, but I guess that can apply to the soft skills topic as well. Um, the example I gave with those two people with the different cultural backgrounds and things, you could include that in seeing the bigger picture. If you're an engineering leader, especially if you're higher ranking, you're planning on bringing some new people in or bringing in this outsourced team. Part of seeing the bigger picture is a strategic move to understand how are these people going to work together? How are they going to communicate? What barriers are they going to be in between and things, especially around the soft skills? And it's something that many engineering leaders have seen with outsourced teams from certain countries in particular, which are more common for having those kind of setups. The way people can often work in some of these outsourced sites is kind of very prescriptive. They're used to receiving detailed instructions on, we want you to build this thing or integrate this feature. And these are the very granular requirements. Can you go off and do it? So you follow your agile processes and tickets and stories and whatever else. And whenever there's something that needs to be done that hasn't been prescribed specifically, communication breaks down. Things don't get completed. And especially for the outsourced team, they don't always come back and say, hey, we're not sure about this. Um, it's just a case, well, you didn't mention it. We didn't know. So you need to kind of plan ahead for those soft skills and communication skills and things with how to deal with those relationships. So I think that's part of seeing the bigger picture and being more strategic. Um, yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And I think you say when you're
excuse me.
dealing with sort of like third parties and things like that, like you need to be clear about the way that they want to receive information. I guess that's true
Hmm.
for if you're managing a team of say 10 people, likelihood is
Hmm.
they're going to want to receive instructions, like feedback, all of that kind of stuff in
Hmm.
different ways. So again, I guess this kind of comes back to what you were saying before about knowing your people, right? Like, and knowing how they like to communicate, how they like to receive instructions. For example, if
Hmm.
you might have someone that likes to have a call like this to run through exactly what you want to do with them. Someone else might be like, just email it to me, let me read it first, digest it,
Hmm.
and then I'll ask you if I have any questions.
Yep.
Like how as an engineering leader, how do you figure those things out with your team? Are you say for example someone new comes in, are you being like, how do you like to work, or is it kind of like a like trial and error, like you just kind of work these things out as you work with new people?
So if it's not already there, something that I will introduce to a company is a minimum set of kind of communication requirements, both at team level and wider with other teams and things. But then I do exactly what you mentioned. When I'm meeting someone for the first time, if I know it's someone that I need to interact with quite frequently as well, so a member of my own team or another stakeholder that I work closely with in another team, I will ask them, are there any considerations for communication that I should be aware of? And this relates to even things like disabilities and neurodiversity and things. I myself have ADHD, so I'm one of these people where I can visualize 50 different things at the same time and draw different conclusions, kind of like a mind map. But I also forget things in my short-term memory, like memory recall, quite easily. So I need to have things written down. So I kind of do a lot of brain dumps and then structure the important stuff afterwards. So for me, especially in kind of remote working things, what's important is these kind of AI chatbots and things which do the transcriptions of calls. I don't have to spend my time making notes during the call to get the content I need. Because what will often happen is my brain will end up focusing just on the note taking and not actually engaging in the conversation with a team. And I know there's a lot of people with different neurodiversity similar to that in our industry, and they struggle with the same kind of thing. So I'm mindful of asking the kind of questions up front. Is there anything we can do to help make communication collaboration better for you now that you're here? We do things like manager readmes where people will say, look, this is me. I like to communicate in this way, some of my hobbies and things like that, so we can get to know each other. So yeah, they're just a couple of examples.
Yeah, no, I love that. I have ADHD as well myself. So whenever, even when I'm doing things like this, you'll say something and I'll be like, oh, I could ask this, I could ask this, I could ask this, I could this.
Yeah.
And I have about 14 different AI recording chatbots on different to-do lists that I need to have a look at some point that I will never get around to. My wife literally looked at my desktop for my laptop yesterday and was horrified because it's just, I was like, that's like looking at the inside of my brain. But it's one of those things that, like you said, what is it? Roughly 60% of people are neurodivergent within software engineering. So it's something that, like,
It is very common. Yeah,
you
absolutely.
need to you need to take account of these things. And I love the someone else called it like a user guide that I spoke to before of how to
Hmm.
deal with me. Like I love those things. Like particularly coming from you as like a manager to be able to be like, this is the way that I work. And the person that I spoke to was like, he sends emails at like midnight because that's when he sits down and responds to everything. But he was very clear
Hmm.
about the fact that if he sends you an email at midnight, he's not expecting you to respond to it at midnight.
Yeah.
That's where he likes to respond to things. So I think getting an idea of how people work is really useful. I feel like maybe when people come into an organization, they probably find it quite hard to be like, this is the way that I work. And it must be quite tough because when interviewing, you'll want to know that the way that you like to work is suitable for that environment, but you must
Hmm.
also not want to be like, here are my list of demands for like the way that I would like to
Hmm.
be interacted with like at that stage. So how would how would you as an engineering leader like kind of either vet during like an interview process or kind of like
Hmm.
chat to like initially to make people feel comfortable with the working environment?
Yeah, no, I love the topic. So I like to challenge the status quo on this a little bit. And so, for example, as human beings, we are used to following processes and systems and frameworks and guidelines and things which tell us how to do things, right? How to structure our lives, how to do our job, and so on. And this is very common in old school software engineering. And I say old school because we have all of these frameworks and libraries and things that we use and follow. For example, Agile and Scrum and things like that. They tell us how we should structure our work and our days and things. But in reality, we're not hiring cogs in machines which are just going to follow that same system over and over again without any change. And that's why I also don't like the term culture fit in job descriptions and interviews and things. I prefer culture ads because we're hiring people. We're going to be working with people, especially when I get into debates with people online and my blog and things about remote working. You'll get the naysayers would say, no, it's better to have people on site in office. It helps build a culture. But a culture is a set of behaviors, things you do, not things you say, or something that's written down on someone's HR or careers page. So that's why when I'm interviewing or when I'm hiring people, I'm more interested in the person and what they're going to bring to the team, not how they're going to copy things that we're already doing, because we want to grow and improve. Technical skills can be learned relatively easily. If they've got the foundation in whatever programming background, then the rest of it can come over time. What I want is to bring people into my team and have people there that are going to enjoy working with each other. So if you were to have one of those water cooler moments, whether it's physical or virtual, you can actually have a genuine chat with them and have a bit of a laugh. And then when you wake up the following morning, you're thinking about work. You may not look forward to it in general, but you're certainly not averse to it. You like the people that are around you when you go there. So that's very important for me in interviews, which is why if I look at the balance between assessing people's technical skills and cultural fit and cultural add and things like that, I'm more interested in the person. More often than not, unless I have a very specific requirement for something technical, I won't even assess technical skills, especially if they're a mid or kind of higher level engineer. If I can see from their resume, their LinkedIn, that they've been doing this job for the past 3-4 years, then they've been doing it. And I trust that until they prove me wrong.
For sure. I think, like you said, there's two things that spring to mind there. There was like my old company always used to be at the end of like an interview, but even if they were really good, it was, could you go for a beer with that person? Like that was like the final thing. And like to me, that there's certain points where sure, like that would be nice, but also can they do the job? Like that should be way more important. And as long as they're not going to be, I guess if you're calling other things like a culture add, like a culture sort of takeaway, like are they going to cause problems? If they could do a really really good job, but they don't drink, like would I not hire them? Like of course you should hire them. Like I feel like it's a bit of an outdated way of thinking. Could they add things to the team and are they not going to cause disruption and can they do their job? I think is and can they, like you said, can they communicate in a way that's going to be effective with the team? Are they going to gel with the team? I think that's much more important as to whether
Mm-hmm.
I could personally go for a beer with the person that's going to be employed by me. Like I think that's much less relevant.
Like, not just about kind of liking them that much that you'd like to go for a beer with them, but that you'll get along in the workplace amicably and professionally. Um, you finding out about their background and hobbies and things like that is not only a good strategic move, but also um, your own kind of personal development, like hearing that you're bringing in these people which are interested in hiking, for example, even though you're not, you know nothing about hiking, they could start talking about what they've been doing in Scottish Highlands and things like that. But it's just bringing something new to the organization in terms of like the people. Obviously, whether they can do the job or not is important. You're never going to know that for sure, no matter how many
Very
technical
true.
assessments you do, especially in Gen AI, where a lot of the interview process can be done with different tools and things, or at least supplemented with. You're never going to know the full skill. And with my background in kind of web development and things around the JavaScript realm, there's not one way of doing things. It's not mathematics. There's 10 different ways to write React functional components, let alone the wider JavaScript and TypeScript and other libraries and frameworks and that. So what exactly were you going to assess in advance? Which is why I put more weight on the cultural side of things. Now, ultimately, things can go wrong both ways. You could do the technical tests and things and find out that they don't have the technical ability that you expected. And it can go wrong the other way as well, that you could think they were a great fit and add addition to the team when you do that side of the assessment, and they could end up being a jerk. Right?
Yeah.
Human beings are kind of like elements on the periodic table. Individually, they could be great, but mix the wrong two environments together, and you have a chemical reaction. Right? So one of the additional reasons why I like the whole cultural ad is to challenge what we've already got. Does the environment need to change? Especially if the organization is growing. If you've gone from a startup of 5 people, including founders and things, to 50 people, a lot of things need to change to support that growth, including the culture. It can't be those 2 best friends from Cambridge that studied computer science together, plus a couple of people they brought in the early stages to help them with areas they didn't know. Like, you're not going to have the same relationships and things like that. So you need to embrace change, and part of that is bringing in people who are different.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really really. I love the periodic table analogy. I've never heard that before. I think that's I think that's really good. Is that trademarked, or is that something that you've stolen off someone else?
It's not trademarked. My education background, actually, I mentioned earlier, I didn't study computer science. I studied medicine and sports science, so I spent a lot of time doing scientific research. So nonsense like that just comes out my brain sometimes.
No, I love that. Yeah, the other one that springs to mind is I remember speaking to a CTO in Austin like a few years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
they had this cultural fit interview as their final stage, and that was conducted by the team, and he was so pro like diversity hires and growing the team and getting new cultures and stuff like that. But the current team was like 6 white males in their 40s, so every single interview, like white male was like, yeah, cool, like we could really get along with this person. Anyone outside of that were just like, "Oh, just don't see, I don't know whether they'd be a good like culture fit." And it was nothing on them not wanting to, it's just the actual culture is the people that are there. And I think companies get trapped almost in hiring the same people again and again and again, and you get to a
Mm-hmm.
point where you're like, well, we've kind of fished this pool, like, and we're now like cast as like this type of people. One, people aren't going
Mm-hmm.
to want to work here, and two, like they're gonna kind of be a little bit like outside of the mold of what we've
Mm-hmm.
built. So it must really restrict companies' sizes if they almost pigeonhole themselves too much in a particular sort of like background or culture. Like you said, if they I
Mm-hmm.
know a lot of companies grow originally through like referrals, and people are going to be quite similar and stuff like that, which is great. But it must be a trap that a lot of companies fall into, where they've got almost like a very typical like person in the team, and then to go
Mm-hmm.
outside of that must be quite tough, because it will create a lot of changes in the way that people work together, and just the general environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a very challenging situation. I don't think I've come across a silver bullet solution to it. I've seen so many different recruitment processes, and they all address this in different ways. People will now add a lot more stages than what we were typically used to an interview process. So you encounter more people. A lot of those stages will have multiple people, not just like a pair of people, but it could be a whole team, for example, like a panel. It's quite common now for leadership roles to be interviewed by their own potential future reports. Um, there's a lot of trade-offs with all of these approaches, so none of them are particularly right or wrong. You just got to understand what the pros and cons are. I think the most important thing for me is to have a neutral person oversee the decision making, especially for more senior or more critical hires, I should say, not so much senior, but critical. Um, think of it like a board to a company. You will have your board members, and they'll normally be like your chair, right? Your president of the board, or what have you. That person has the most important role, not necessarily because they have any more power than anyone else, but because of neutrality or kind of no confirmation bias and things. With the board, you may have people from a finance background, with a business background, with the tech background, and so on and so forth. They all provide their input, and everyone thinks the input that they give on whatever decision or candidate in this case is the best one. But then it's down to that chairperson to make the neutral decision based on all the information presented to them. So even if you've only got a 3-stage hiring process, you've got 3 different kind of demographics involved in the interview process. It could be someone from engineering, someone from product, someone from HR. And then it should be someone relatively neutral. Doesn't matter which department they're from, but someone that doesn't really have anything to gain by choosing one person over the other. They should be looking out for the business goals and the objective of why they're hiring that person. They should look at the information or feedback from the interviewers and saying, look, this is what we need to hire, these skills, this type of person, this is what we need to do the job. Out of these candidates that have made it to the last stage, what are their qualities? And you make a neutral decision, at least somewhere along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm aware that, and probably this is pretty typical for 2 people with ADHD trying to have a conversation. We've veered wildly off topic, but I appreciate we've done a little bit of prep in advance as well. All super useful stuff, and a lot of it around obviously like hiring for sort of cultural fit and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of other points around sort of soft skills as an engineering leader. What else have you found? And I know a lot of this has been from kind of your background from elsewhere and kind of lessons learned as you've kind of grown through these roles yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What else is important when it comes to sort of soft skills that people can work on and be aware of as an engineering leader?
So I guess looking at my notes here, the things that are kind of come up often are problem solving, critical thinking, and conflict management are 3 kind of broad topics there. Um, the critical thinking part is a popular one at the moment. I'm seeing a lot of LinkedIn content and things coming up about it. A lot of people discussing it. To me, critical thinking is the kind of unknown unknowns, the angle or the perspective that isn't immediately obvious in a given scenario, conversation, or problem statement. People tend to think of things in black and white. They may think of the grey area in between. In terms of the knowns and unknowns, that's black and white. The grey area I would call the known unknowns. So areas that you think may be a problem or roadblock or barrier and things, but you don't know the details. They're potential common areas. It's the unknown unknowns. That's where critical thinking comes in. And I think people with neurodiversities like ADHD, Asperger's and things like that are really good at tackling this area because of the way, I think I used the term earlier, our brains kind of use mind maps. We throw up all of these different options into the air and we can see all these different pathways and impediments or solutions and things like that. And then we can bring them up in the conversation. What about this? So that comes into the soft skills, into the whole communication and collaboration aspect. There's this angle, there's this thing. It may be that it's a valid thing, but it may not be a problem for another 12 months. But it's been brought up, it's been put down, people are aware of it, it's been discussed, but it's also just psychological safety. Someone has spoken up and said something, and they've been allowed to express that and contribute to the conversation and things. Critical thinking, I think, according to the textbook, rather than my abstract explanation there,
I think
is
I've got an AS level in critical thinking, and I'm not sure what it is still to this day, if I'm honest.
I think, according to the book, it's more about analyzing information, qualitative, quantitative data, identifying problems, solutions, things like that. Um, these things are all important, right? And especially in engineering teams, we should be good at them. That we look at a lot of mathematical or logical things, code, and so on and so forth. Um, the one area where I often see a weakness, and kind of relates to engineering metrics, is the whole quantitative versus qualitative data. I think in any kind of data analysis situation and in our communication and things as well, we should have mixed research methods or mixed data methods. We heavily rely on quantitative data. We hear of story points and sprints and all these numbers that are thrown around in the industry all the time. And not to say some of them aren't important, but they can also be skewed. There's confirmation biases, and anyone that's studying any kind of statistics will know the flaws in that. When you introduce the qualitative side, so people's perspectives, think about customer satisfaction polls and things like that, developer experience polls. How does a person feel? So to relate it to sprints, um, you could have your velocity metrics and things telling you one thing, giving you certain signals. But then on the other hand, if you ask the team, how do you think this sprint went? Do you feel it went slow? Could it have gone faster? Like their perceptions of things. The numbers may say they were great, but they could turn around and say, actually, we could have done better. There was these kind of things. I got this vibe. We were spending too much time in meetings or calls and things. So it's important to have that mixed approach and incorporate that into your critical thinking and your communication when discussing things.
For sure. Yeah, I spoke a lot with the episode previously around with Ben around using DX to improve sort of developer experience and things like that,
Yeah.
which is super useful. I guess from just kind of wrapping up your experience and where you've got to and things like that, like what if someone wants to work on soft skills? I feel like there's almost like a thing of like technical things you can work on. Soft skills,
Hmm.
you particularly as a manager, some people feel like you either can are a good manager or not because of the soft skills that you either have or don't have. Like there are areas like this that you can obviously work on and improve on. Like what would be some actionable insights, either through things that you found through trial and error or things that you found that work well? What are some actionable insights that people can do to improve their soft skills or work on their soft skills,
Hmm.
if they feel like that's an area that they're not as strong on?
Um, so I think we should all continuously try to improve our soft skills because it's such a broad area and an area that's constantly changing. It's all to do with communication and collaboration, right? And the way that we do that in day to day life is changing all the time. I a number of years ago, while working for Microsoft, thought I had exceptional soft skills. I even wrote some kind of communication modules and things for the wider company that were put across different teams. And then fast forward a couple of years and everyone started working remotely and doing a lot more video calls and things like that. They were no longer communicating and things in the same way. So the rules got changed. What I knew then previously no longer applied in the same way. So I had to keep changing. And even though I started working kind of remotely 8 or 9 years ago now, long before COVID made a lot of people do it, um, the way we can communicate and collaborate has changed a lot. There's a lot more options. I would encourage people to constantly try to improve, look at the new methods and new dynamics that relate to them in their job, in their home life. Um, Over communicate, communicate often, communicate using different methods to suit different audiences. So that could be email, Slack or Messenger or whatever it is your organization uses. Um, Having collaborative environments like Slack canvases or Notion or whatever it is for people to dump information in, to have some kind of like a wiki or a knowledge base. um, to confirm people's interpretations of what has been said. So the whole listening versus hearing. We often go into these meetings and group calls and things, and we hear the words that are being spoken, but how much of it is actually processed and understood in the same way the speaker intended for the audience to translate it. So repeating something back, for example, even if you feel that you've understood it, so what you're trying to explain or the question that you just asked is this, am I right? Just repeating that back. There's loads of little things. I mean, it's definitely not an exhaustive topic or list of things that you can do, but just encourage people to keep trying to do better and be mindful of the audience.
Yeah, and I think like you said, like making sure that people understand kind of like what's required of them, their preferred communication methods, like all of that kind of stuff. That you said that can evolve like over time, and I think if you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to do that, and a lot of this comes down to you showing that you're putting yourself orders that this is how you can communicate with me. Like, do you know what I mean? I feel like just doing that will have people be like, oh, well, I actually prefer like this method, like myself. Or if someone asks you to do something, you can be like, would you mind like clarifying just to make sure that we're all on the same page? They can then sort of like reciprocate. So making it like a safe environment for people to actually be like, oh, I don't understand what's just been said. I think coming back to what we were saying before about new people joining teams, like if you were just to give someone a requirement over email, now they might just be like, well, I guess this is how things work here. I'm not really sure what's
Mm-hmm.
required of me. Like I'll go away and have a go at it, and they might end up banging their head against a brick wall for
Yep.
2 weeks because they don't really know what they should be doing. So I think you as an
Yep.
engineering leader can be like, cool, like I'm going to send this to you every month. If you would prefer, like I can give you a call to like run through it. Like you
Yep.
obviously feel free to ask any questions. I want you to kind of challenge anything that you're not sure on, and ask me as many questions as you like,
Yep.
and kind of have that collaborative environment, and then working out what works between you and
Mm-hmm.
your reports, like in terms of delivery methods and
Yep.
the sort of like feedback and understanding on what's required.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. All of those things. But the only kind of additional thing I would add, and possibly the most crucial to all of this, is context and the whys. Even if you've used the tools, you've used all these methods to communicate things often and clearly and whatever else, it's imperative for people to understand why. It may seem like a trivial thing, like a member of the team messaging another person, can you give me a call or are you free to talk?
Literally, like
That
my
can
what.
trigger a lot of people.
Oh, mate, like that is one of my worst things to receive. It's like, are you free?
Yeah,
Or there's one member of my team, they'll just message hi, and that's it. And I'm like, right, who died? Like,
yeah,
what is it that you want?
exactly. I mean, it may be like a totally harmless reason, but when you leave people hanging, some people can be like really adversely affected by it. So give them some context, and especially if you're asking somebody to do something, even if you feel that it's a trivial thing, it's a day-to-day part of their job, they may not see it in the same way. So communicate the why it is they're doing it, the value behind it, how it ties into something to do with their role or a business objective, and things like that. Um, and use the right language, the way you would speak to a technical versus non-technical person, or um, an engineer versus a member of the board or the exec team may be totally different. So make sure you're using the right language and formats and things for the audience.
Sure. And then like one final thing, I think just coming back to the point that you had before about the two different members of your team kind of communicating with each other, it's kind of watching those communications as well, right? From afar and making sure that they're successful and set up in the right way to communicate with each
Mm-hmm.
other. So having forums where people feel comfortable to push their ideas forward. For example, some people aren't great on group Zoom calls. If you were to like be like, does anyone have any input? One person might have
Nope.
something, but like not want to share it, whereas some person might want to say the whole time. So you might know that certain members of your team you've got to follow up
Yep.
with over Slack to be like, oh no, she didn't
Yep.
say anything, like was there anything else, and kind of
Yep.
making sure that as a team you can kind of communicate as well, just not you directly with them.
Hmm.
There was something I read a little while ago. It was about communicating in like the digital age, and apparently people are completely split into two buckets. Some
Hmm.
people have adapted digital communication, and some people just haven't, but are doing it anyway because they have to. And
Hmm.
they said that something as little as a full stop means completely different things
Yeah.
to both people. One can be seen as aggressive if they're to receive something with a full stop at the end of it, whereas the other side not sending something with a full stop is seen as bad punctuation, and like just
Hmm.
something as small as that like could be completely change the tone of like a message that you're sending to someone or how someone's communicating. So I think just being aware of those differences and trying to just get a almost like a little bit of a summary of everyone that works for you, how do they like to communicate,
Hmm.
and making sure that you're able to match with their
Yeah.
soft skills, and then the team match with each other's soft skills is probably really really important.
It's like what I was saying earlier about the outsourced teams and certain cultures and things, the body language part, right? Especially if you're on a video call and you don't have cameras on, in terms of communication, which is made up of body language, tone, and then the actual words themselves, body language is the most important thing. If you're removing that from the equation, all that's left is the tone. And in written form, that is punctuation and grammar and things like you've just said. But yet we weight so heavily the words themselves, whether it's spoken or written, when it should be the other way around. Which is why, if possible, you should have videos on if people are comfortable doing that. And then you can read the room a bit better, see if people are more engaged, if they're understanding things and that. But also understand that certain cultures, I know from growing up in an environment in London where it was predominantly Indian people around me in school and things like that. A lot of them, in terms of body language, they nod. Oh, sorry, no, it was the other way around. They shake their head side to side when they're agreeing with something, like to affirm an action, right?
Yeah.
Whereas we would typically associate shaking the head with something negative. They're in disagreement, right? So you've got to be aware of even little things like that. You could be having a conversation with someone from a particular culture where they're used to doing certain things with their body language, which are the opposite of what we're used to.
Yeah.
So it's this is why I said you hire people, not cogs in a machine. Like you got to be understanding of the way they communicate, behave, like to do things, and try and find a balance.
For sure. And then I think if you're hiring four people, like you've got a good understanding of what this person is like, and either like you're like cool, could work with them, like have vetted every single point. I know their communication styles inside and out. We can work together. They're going to gel with the team, or
Yep.
you're like they're a good enough person and they're bringing enough that diamond in the rough, like we can find a way to like work together. But then like you said, you're not just being like, oh, they're a Java developer, they can come in and write Java, and then all of these things unfold that, like you said, they're an asshole, or like they can't communicate correctly, or like all of this kind of stuff. Then the Java kind of goes out the window, because that doesn't really matter at that point,
Yep.
because they're destroying the culture, like causing issues and things like that. Whereas if you've vetted those things out or hired for the person, like sure, they might need to ramp up on like a certain framework or something like that, because they're not
Hmm.
as experienced as you thought that they were. But you can communicate with that person and give honest feedback and work together to kind of get to that point. And I spoke to someone yesterday, and they literally said to me, they were like, if someone calls themselves, like they're functional programming, so they were like, if someone calls themselves a Haskell developer, I'm not interested. Like if they call themselves a software engineer, I am, because we don't know if we'll be using X technology in 6, 12, 18 months time. So if someone, they're identifying themselves as the technology that they use, they're like,
Mm.
they're probably not for us, which
Yeah.
take what you will from that and take that with a pinch of salt. But I thought it was really interesting because like that's not what they see as important. They see people that they were very interested about what the person had achieved and the problems that they'd solved and like things like that,
Hmm.
rather than what technologies that they'd used. Like, and that's what they were interested in. And it's the same with what you were saying in terms of you're interested in the person and what they bring to the table as a person and the ideas that they have and things like that, as opposed to what specific framework that they can code in at the
Hmm.
time that you're bringing them on board. So yeah, I think hiring for the soft skills of the person that you're bringing in and making sure that you can work with them and they can work with the team is imperative to making sure that people are successful.
And absolutely. I mean, you've touched on so many things there that I'd love to discuss in more detail, but I'm conscious of the time. But yeah, totally agree. We need to be more open minded about the our approach to the business, how we communicate, the people that we hire. Um, yeah,
Fantastic. Well, I think we touched on about one of the 15 points that, no, well, I'm joking, we did a bit better than that, but no, I really enjoyed that. Really appreciate you making the time. If I'll obviously tag you and your Substack and stuff like that when we pop it out, but if anyone wants to like connect with you or follow you, like where are you most active? Like where's the best place to kind of reach you and see your stuff?
it'd be my LinkedIn and my Substack blog, both relatively active. So yeah, you can reach me there. I'm more than happy to answer questions or help people out in my LinkedIn inbox. Always there to assist people in the community. So yeah, just reach out.
Amazing. Really appreciate that, man. Have a good one.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. Take care.